So we're live. We don't have music again. Hello, everybody. It's the Untethered MMA show on Fight Fans Radio. It is February 20th, 2014. And if you've noticed, Matt Roth is not here. If you want to reach the show, you can reach me at It's Mike Fagan on Twitter, Derek at Untethered Subo, and special guest Patrick Wyman at Patrick_Wyman. And if you want to bother Matt Roth, at Matt Roth 512. Derek, how are you doing today?
I slept through class this morning. I didn't even move when my alarm went off, so that was fun. Missed out on a little bit of biopsychology, but I was picking up a little bit of hash from my dispensary today, and my dealer there, who is the definition of a casual MMA fan, who has a bar across the street from him that shows the fights and occasionally makes his way over there, asked me specifically whether or not Ronda was fighting this weekend, and Len wanted to know what my plans were because he's planning on making it out for it. So just a little bit of anecdotal evidence to the actual casual appeal that Ronda Rousey has that I don't think like a Tatiana Ali did necessarily.
We'll get into more of that a little bit. Patrick Wyman is. Are you officially a writer at Bloody Elbow, Patrick?
I am officially a writer at Bloody Elbow, yeah.
Well, congratulations, and I'm sorry.
Don't worry, Chris Martin still
Thank you, and the condolences are appreciated.
Patrick, if you followed my Twitter all the last month, I've been pimping the series he did, the top 25 prospects, which was something that started a few years ago when I was still there with Leland Rolling and Smoogie, and I had a lot of issues with it personally, but I think Patrick's work is far superior. It really built well on what they started. And how about you talk about that before we get into anything current?
Oh, sounds great. Well, and thank you for the plugs. I appreciate it. I mean, my project started with Leland and Smoogie's work. I took the 150 fighters that they profiled over the course of 2 years, and I tried to break it down and see what's happened to those guys since then. How have they done? What fighters were most likely to make it to the UFC or to make it to the higher reaches of Bellator? Try and isolate what were the factors that were most responsible, or that seemed to correlate most closely with success. And what I found was age played a massive role. The younger guys did better. Athleticism was huge. The guys who were faster, more explosive, were infinitely more likely to make it. And most importantly, the guys who came from the biggest camps were the ones who were most likely to make it. Now, whether that had to do with the quality of the training partners they had access to, the quality of the coaches they had access to, or simply a bump from being exposed to those guys and the established channels through which fighters reach the UFC. It's hard to tell exactly what that was, but those were the things that were by far the most important. So that's what I kept in mind when I was trying to make the list. I didn't follow those exclusively. I left some room in there for guys who were coming from smaller camps who weren't the most athletic. We'll see how I do. Like, I don't think by any means I've nailed down the formula for finding successful prospects. But I do think that it's time to bring a little more analytical rigor into the process.
Yeah, that was, when I first read one of the first ones that you put out, that was what stood out to me the most, was that, Leland and Smoogie's work was extensive and certainly comprehensive, but there didn't seem to be an underlying mythology behind it. And they had guys like Antonio Carvalho on there who were like well above 30 and have actually been established in the sport for a long time and probably weren't actually great prospects. So yeah, it was really great to see that sort of, as you said, rigor put into it. But moving along, Fight Night 36 happened over the weekend. Derek, we'll start with you. How did you find the main event?
I found it to be everything that I wanted it to be. I expected the kind of iffy, but still. And you'll bring up the fight metric stacks later. I don't know if you were working the fight, but they turned out to be pretty interesting. And I'm wondering if it's going to lead to another debate as to what does and doesn't constitute a quote-unquote significant strike and what constitutes a landed strike, because it feels like they were giving Mousasi a little more credit than he deserved for some of the glancing blows that he was seeming to land throughout the fight. I had the scorecard 49-46 Machida. So I had no objections with any of that. I still think that Mousasi is a stud, best fighter he's ever fought by a large margin, and he looked about as good as I could have hoped he could.
Well, and the thing with significant strikes, and it's something, Rami's even talked about it. I think he talked about it when we interviewed him a couple of years ago. Um, the naming of the stat has sort of played a negative impact on it, and it's difficult because there's not really a better alternative. All a significant strike is trying to measure is all strikes at distance and power strikes in the clinch and on the ground. I'm pretty sure that's the exact definition. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are the most effective blows or the most significant blows, subjectively speaking. And was one of the things I wrote about in my review of the show is that you can't just look at the stats and say that a fight was a robbery or was judged incorrectly. Just like you can't just watch a fight and totally ignore the stats and say like, well, this is what I saw, so this is definitely 100% correct, because that's how you get Leonard Garcia decisions with him winning, fights that he clearly lost.
Yeah, and that it goes against the idea of kind of, and even by fight metrics, kind of quote unquote computerized way of calculating their total effectiveness scores and their offensive and grappling rankings. They still had Machida winning, I think, a 4 rounds to 2 decision. I think they had it 49-47 for him.
I think they had one drawn round in there.
Right. So they had a 1-10-10, 3 for Machida, and the one. Which one was the clear one for Mousasi? Did everyone have the second for him?
I think it was either the second or the fourth.
Yeah, those were the 2 rounds that I saw heading into the 5th that I while watching it, thought that Mousasi could have won.
Yeah, I think I gave him the second. I haven't had a chance to rewatch it yet, but I definitely plan to because it's exactly what I thought it was going to be, and just leaping right into the co-main event. Everybody's talking. I was floating the idea of perhaps a mini little 4-man tournament here to determine the next contender for Weidman versus Belfort, whoever wins that match. But at this point, I think Machida would make Jacare look pretty silly.
One thing you sort of brought it up, and I'll ask you first, Patrick. Is a lot of people? I heard a lot of people on Twitter in the main event saying if Machida doesn't finish Mousasi, he doesn't deserve the title shot. And I really think Machida and Jacare both have a good argument. I think the thing that's going to give Machida the benefit here is one, he's a former champion at a higher weight class, and 2, he's a year older or a year and a half older, and his window is closing faster than Jacare's.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way the situation looks right now actually fits for both of them. I think that Jacare, it sounded like he was injured and he's going to need some time off for a surgery. So you line up Machida to fight the winner of Weidman Belfort. I'm hoping I'll actually get to go to that fight. And then you have another guy waiting for a title shot as a backup. I mean, at this point, yeah, the fact that Machida was a former champion that's a massive factor. And I mean, he's got name value. Apparently, the ratings for that fight night show, despite the fact that it started late, were pretty outstanding. I mean,
1.4 million, which is, I mean, that's a crazy number if that thing had started right at 6 o'clock when it normally does.
Yeah, I mean, you can't undersell that factor. I mean, and whether Machida is a legitimate draw or not, I mean, that's hard to say, but it certainly doesn't hurt. Whereas, Jacare is well known to hardcore fans at this point. I mean, he's been around for a long time. He's been very, very good for a long time, but I don't think he has the same kind of casual recognition that a Machida does.
Yeah, and I think there's another interesting thing here too. If I have to imagine the UFC, especially if Jacare is out, they've got to have Machida on call in case something happens with Belfort leading up to the Weidman fight in May.
Oh God, given Belfort's injury history, you have to. I mean, maybe you don't tell Machida to go into a camp, but you certainly say, stay in shape, be ready to make the weight. Absolutely. I mean, they should be doing that anyway, given the way the injury bug has started to hit over the last couple of years. I mean, for example, to bring it around to UFC 170 a little bit, why there wasn't a second light heavyweight fight on that card when Cormier Evans was almost certainly going to be a number 1 contenders bout. Why you didn't have a backup light heavyweight bout on that card as a backup is beyond me. I mean, it's completely beyond me. But I mean, having Machida ready to go in May just in case something happens, that's got to be the smart plan.
Well, light heavyweight is just kind of a barren wasteland right now, which is why it's thrilling we get to see prospect Patrick Cummins. Just sprinkle that in there for you guys. I hope he made the list, frankly, because if not, it's kind of an embarrassment at this point. Now that he's the best 205 prospect that anybody was able to find on such short notice. It's unbelievable. I think being 4-0, like by definition, you're just kind of prospecty. But I completely agree with that. Evans, I don't know about. I know he's been injured before. I don't know how many times he's had to pull out of a fight this close to actual fight time. I think that's pretty rare for him. We got the background noise. Don't blow us he blows us a kiss. He signs in, makes a bunch of noise. God damn it. This is going to sound great on iTunes. I tell you what. It's best when they don't have the video portion of it. But I thought that Carmon actually acquitted himself very, very well.
The vaporizers in Louisville.
I think he's. I thought he was talking about mine for a second, but no, he means somebody who's actually there. Mute yourself.
I got him.
All right, Jesus Christ. I thought that Carmon looked really, really good. I as somebody who has historically taken the adversarial position of I don't really give a shit if you think a fighter is boring. If he smothers your favorite fighter, then that's awesome, and he deserves credit for that. I think that Carmon is just going to be a foil for up-and-coming, exciting 185ers for a long time and be hated. Like, I think he could end I know Lombard's down at 170 now, but any one of those big hitters at 185 that doesn't really have any kind of ground game or grappling ability, Carmon's just going to eat them alive. He's going to have a job for a long time.
Well, on the flip side of that, I thought, I thought Carmon definitely, as you said, acquitted himself well, but I thought Jacare looked even better. He entered that third round probably even on the cards, and he really needed to win that third round in a pretty big fight for him, in a fight that, in my ideal world is a 5-rounder. And he went out and went right to his bread and butter and completely dominated it and really sealed the victory.
Well, congratulations, Mike. You're the first person to want to see Francis Carmon in a 5-round fight.
He's a top 10 welterweight, and I think a win over Jacare probably put him, right behind Machida or close to it in a title contention.
Yeah, a win against Jacare put him a win away from a title shot, especially with the streak that he was on. I think it was 6 straight leading up until that fight in the UFC. Maybe it was 5 straight. But even then, and I don't think, and it's one of those things where, like, if it's a number one contenders bout, and if one guy wins, he gets a title shot, and the other guy doesn't, I don't like that. So if I'm not okay with Carmon getting a title shot for beating Jacare, I really shouldn't be okay with the opposite of that.
We've talked about the two winners and a little bit about Carmon here, but what? And we'll start with you, Patrick. Where does Gegard Mousasi go from here?
Oh man, that's tough to say, but I think you could set him up for a bout with Carmon, and I think that's and I think you could have a lot of fun with that. I mean, simply because Mousasi has some of the most underrated grappling and certainly one of the most underrated guards in all of MMA. I mean, that's not a gimme fight for Carmon, even if he can get him to the ground, and grind away. That's a pretty interesting matchup. I mean, but Mousasi's still young, and he's only, I think, 28, and he also he has the benefit of a ton of high quality experience. He's also a guy who's barely gotten hit in his career. I mean, even Machida wasn't exactly landing volume on him. So that really bodes well for his longevity. He's a guy who could compete at a high level for another 4, 5, 6 years. So this is a setback for him, but he's still young enough to be growing as a fighter, especially if he's going to be taking it more seriously than it seems like he has in the past.
Derek, what about you? What do you think? What would you like to see out of Mousasi coming up?
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of fights for him at 185, and it's what gives me hope for 205 as well. Because a couple of years ago, we considered both middleweight and welterweight to just kind of be desolate beyond the champion, and that there weren't any up and coming fighters that could potentially pose a threat. And partially it's because of the fact that Anderson Silva lost to Chris Weidman twice, and the fact that George St. Pierre has left. But even other than that, Johnny Hendricks gave him a more competitive fight than I think even most people thought possible, despite how close the betting lines were. So I'd see Mousasi as sticking at 185 instead of bouncing back up to light heavyweight. I don't want to see Machida do that either, and I don't think either one will. And I would like to see him personally against the winner of Bisping versus Kennedy, Which, by the way, if you're going to have a fight between a Brit and a Special Forces American, why the hell would you put that fight in Quebec? It doesn't make any sense. That's where this fight is.
I didn't even realize that. That's good.
It's stupid. That's the first thing I thought. It was like, where are they going to have it? Are they going to have it in the UK or are they going to have it in the US? No, they're going to have it in fucking Canada, and the part of Canada that doesn't even like being part of Canada.
Well, didn't Dana White spend a whole lot of time boasting about the fact that he could sell a fight in Montreal between two Brazilians? I mean, it kind of fits with that narrative. Oh, it doesn't matter where the fight is, we can sell it. It's like, no.
I just wanted crowd. They could have held this fight in Brazil, and they would have chanted, "Oh, you're going to die at both of them," and that would have been fantastic.
One last thing about Musashi before we move on, and I probably should have brought this up last week, leading into the show, but is he the guy that was most hurt by the whole last year of Strikeforce? Because if you look at his record, 2008, 2009, he went through Dream and Strikeforce, and he beat for a true prospect, he beat a pretty good lineup of guys: Dennis Kang, Dong-Sik Yoon, Melvin Manouf, Jacare, Mark Hunt, Babalu, Sokuju, Gary Goodridge, and then he lost to King Mo in Nashville. And then after that, it's guys like Jake O'Brien, Tatsuya Mizuno, Keith Jardine, Hiroshi Izuma, Ovince St. Preux, Mike Kyle, and then finally when he gets into the UFC, it's Ilir Latifi, which is just a lot of bad luck. But that last year or two in
Who was it supposed to
Strikeforce
be in his first fight? I don't remember who Latifi replaced.
It was supposed to be Gustafsson. Gustafsson had a terrible cut in training.
That's right, and the Swedish people wouldn't let him fight, and Dana White called the Swedish people pussies. I remember all that now. It's all coming back.
And the reason I ask, we talked about how Musashi's only 28. He's 29 in August. 2 years ago he was 26, and that's really right entering his prime. And he lost, he lost a year to a knee injury as well. But I can't think of anyone else that was more hurt by the situation in Strikeforce.
The funny thing is, it's between him and Gilbert Melendez, who has now voluntarily put his head back into that noose of not being able to find anyone to fight. Great.
Well, yeah, I mean, as far as Strikeforce goes, yeah, it's probably Musashi, especially because that was he had an opportunity to get exposed to a whole audience of American fans, and he missed out on that. I mean, Melendez, people knew who Melendez was. Melendez still has a following in Northern California. I mean, it's not like people were going to completely forget about Gilbert Melendez, but Musashi's another story. I mean, Strikeforce could have made some good fights for him, but the lack of cards, the canceling cards, all of that worked against him. I mean, nobody had any idea who he was coming in when he was scheduled for that fight for that fight with Gustafsson.
And even with that Gustafsson fight, even if it had gone off as planned, that fight was still on Fuel TV, and that was a fight that, not many people were going to watch just on the exposure that Fuel TV has around the country.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, Gustafsson, for being the only exciting prospect coming up at 205 over the last couple of years, did not exactly get the full court press in terms of building him into a star. I mean, he got that one fight on Fox with Shogun, but other than that, it was Fuel or pay-per-view prelims. I mean, they did not exactly go out of their way to try and build him up.
Yeah, he got the Henan Barao treatment.
Yeah, exactly.
Derek, you want to add anything before we move on to?
I feel like you guys know a lot more about the prospects and how they're kind of built up than I do.
I don't. 5 years ago I might have, but now there's just too many fighters. I don't know half the guys in the UFC anymore.
You know what they should really do is they should shrink the sport so that it's easier for us to manage as journalists. That would make me really happy as a writer. Just less jobs for fewer fighters and less things for me to cover and care about. That's what I want.
Well, and actually, that's one thing we can talk about, too, before we move on here. One of the things I wrote about in my Fight Night 36 review was that the different, there was, before UFC 127, the St. Pierre Shields card, that was the first show where every single fight was broadcast live in the Zuffa era from the prelims through the main event. And I remember that being a really exciting thing. It was the first time that you didn't have to, buy a fight on UFC Vault or try to find a torrent of it, and you didn't have to wait. But now, if you watch the entire broadcast of an event, you start at 5 or 6 o'clock with the now Fight Pass prelims. By the time you get to the main event, you're 4 or 5 hours, or 3 to 4 or 5 hours into a show, and it's exhausting. And it's especially exhausting when you don't really understand or know all these guys and what their story is and what the relevance is. And by the time you get to the main event, you're sort of tired out. And I contrasted that when I saw UFC 169. I was out of the house, and I didn't have time to watch the prelims, and I just watched the pay-per-view, and it was a completely different experience. Like, a lot of people on Twitter, had the typical exhaustion by the pay-per-view, but I thought it was great, and I didn't have any sort of fatigue, consumer fatigue going into it.
It is different, and I completely agree. What you're beginning to understand is why some of these matches were, in fact, dark matches for years and years and years. I mean, it was tough to get access, and it still is, given that the Fight Pass is still not 100% where it should be in terms of content. Somebody who was looking for your troll job of the UFC's Twitter account this weekend was very good. It was quite effective, and that's the thing. I mean, I can defend the UFC all day. I can be that guy. I still want the Fight Pass to be a resource for new fans. They want to look into fighters that they just heard of, and as is right now, it's an ineffective tool for that at best. And I want to see it be better for new fans to get them involved in it, because you're not going to get brand new fans coming in and watching 6 hours at a time and giving up half of their conscious Saturday in order to become, new fans of the sport. That's not an interest of theirs, so I don't think that the prelim numbers that we used to freak out about, like how many people were watching on Spike on the lead-in to the pay-per-view, I don't really think we give a shit about that anymore, because the prelims are for kind of the hardcore consumers of the product. I just love the fact that they're all available now, and that guys who are fighting on the undercards, on the Facebook prelims, the Fight Pass prelims, whatever it may be, now are being seen by more eyes and are less apt to get screwed out of an award like, Performance of the Night as it is now. I think that it's all around a good thing, but there is that viewer fatigue, and the simple solution is to skip a few. And, very, very few people watch every single fight live now. You can catch up to it if it turns out that he's worth a shit and he doesn't go 1-2 and get bounced from the promotion. But until he goes, 2-1 and gets himself up to a prelim that's on TV, you don't really need to worry about it.
I mean, after watching the entirety of the seemingly interminable prelims for the last 3 cards, I mean, I'm pretty sure we witnessed the rise and fall of a brand new ice age. Like, I looked out my window and I saw a saber-toothed tiger chasing an Irish elk, while Cristiano Marcelo was engaging in battle with Joe Proctor. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is, as far as the Fight Pass prelims are concerned, this is what's going to happen when you have when you're going through a massive roster expansion without a real plan for how you're going to go about developing prospects. I mean, at some point, you're going to have to start picking winners and losers, or trying to figure out what guys are worth developing and which ones aren't. They haven't figured that out yet, so you end up with matchups between 2 pretty evenly matched guys who are adjusting to a higher level of competition, more pressure. Like real octagon jitters. I mean, that's a real thing, and so you end up with these kind of underwhelming, like, relatively low output decisions, regardless of the weight class. They just drag on and on and on and on, and until either they stop expanding the roster, or those guys get better, or they offer more meaningful finishing bonuses or guarantees, so guys aren't worried about being cut after one bad performance. I mean, this is the kind of thing you're going to see. And it is hard to sit there through hour after hour after hour of kind of meaningless decisions. Like, I mean, it's not going to be a product for everybody, basically.
Well, and even if they aren't, decisions, even if those fights are being finished, I can go watch a handful of regional promotions in the area and watch a bunch of guys that aren't UFC quality knock each other out.
That's just no relevance on it. 3 hours. Last local card I went from like 5 to midnight, and it was like 11 fights. It was just unbelievable with the intermissions and the sloppiness. Local MMA is a different kind of deal, but compare it to like NFL fans who watch one game every Sunday, who watch their team's game, whether they're in the morning slot or the afternoon slot or they're the primetime game, versus fans that start at 10 o'clock on the West Coast and go all the way until it's dark outside. Like, those are differing degrees of NFL fans.
I think the NFL is not the best example for that, though, because I think
I'm just comparing length, because if you look at the length of an NFL game, about 3 hours. So you've got the main card, which is 3, which almost everyone can commit to, because 3 hours is a baseball game, it's a football game, it's the main card. And then 6 hours, you're talking like an all-day affair, really.
I think your typical NFL fan, though, is watching the afternoon game, the morning game, the afternoon game, and the Sunday night game.
I don't know if that's the typical NFL fan. I think that the majority of NFL fans have their team that they tune into every week, and maybe they'll watch the big game or they'll watch Monday night. But I don't think there's like 5 nationally televised games a week between Thursday and everything else. I don't know how many fans are watching all 5.
Well, yeah, I don't know how many are watching that Thursday game. But I think a better example is baseball. I mean, I think you don't have too many baseball fans that are setting up their Sunday, their Saturday to watch.
Or they watch like 3 games a week. Yeah, they'd spend like 9-10 hours a week watching baseball during the season. I mean, maybe you listen to it on the radio when you're in your car, or you get it through osmosis like that. You've got a little tab in your browser updating you with the box score. But most people aren't sitting through a full baseball game on TV routinely, 50 times a year. Like, that's out of the ordinary.
Well, I mean, the major difference between those two, between the NFL, MLB, comparing that to spending your whole day watching a fight card, is that the quality of the product is going to be consistent throughout. I mean, not all games are created equal, but it's not like there are clear distinctions between the teams that show up in the Thursday night game.
Well, they don't save their best players for the 8th and 9th inning, like tune in for the 8th or 9th, even if you miss the rest of the game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a competitive enterprise from the very beginning.
Yeah.
One thing too, in addition, related to this, how would you guys feel if the UFC cut the number of fights on each card? They've typically, the last few years, you've seen 11, 12, 13, usually around 12. What if they cut that down to 9 or 10? Is that something that you would, as a consumer, personally, that you would encourage, or is it something that you enjoy those 12, 13 fight cards?
It's something I wouldn't mind, because the 2 or 3 fights that are going to get cut are ones that, you might have, if you were busy on Saturday afternoon, you're just like, well, I guess I'll just catch the Fox Sports prelims. I'll miss the Facebook ones or whatever for now. I wouldn't mind it personally. It would probably cut back on a little bit of the journalist fatigue, but it would also necessitate more cards, because they got to get these guys fights. They got to figure out who they want to keep and who they don't. I don't know if the roster expansion is still continuing. I know that it plateaued around 400 fighters, and I think it was there a few months ago. I don't know how many guys they've added versus subtracted since then. I think it's been pretty static.
Added. 65 added. They're at like 460 now.
Jesus Christ.
Good God.
Jeez.
Okay, how many of those are women? Because I'm totally okay with that. There were no women and no 125ers, so they can add all of those that they want.
Well, you consider all the Ultimate Fighter seasons they're running now, too, and you have to assume that each one of those is going to add another 5 or 6 fighters, and you're looking at another guaranteed, 20 fighters coming in.
I wish that weren't a guarantee, honestly. I mean, because frankly, I mean, the quality of the guys that they're getting on Tough right now, a lot of them are not going to be good enough to compete in the UFC long term. Look at a good example of this is Cajun Johnson, who's on Tough Nations right now. I mean, he's a perfectly fine regional level fighter. I mean, he's hitting the peak of he's hitting his prime right now, and he might just barely be good enough to stick around the very bottom rung at 155 or 170, pretty deep divisions. I mean, he's fine, but you want to keep him on the roster for a year and a half because he's a tough guy? I mean, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, I like it if there are going to be seasons that are packed with more talent than others, but if there were only a guarantee of keeping maybe the top 2 guys, I would be fine with that.
So wait a minute, just so I'm being clear, you're saying that these guys, these tough fighters that don't win the show and aren't going to do anything but hang around at the bottom of the divisions, they don't provide any value to the UFC. So the UFC really shouldn't be offering them contracts. It's a no-brainer for the fighters to take the contracts because they're going to make more money in the shit region of the UFC than anywhere that they've been before. But for the UFC, they really shouldn't be offering those kind of fighters contracts because they don't do anything for the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe kind of a harsh position, but it's but if you're worried about bloating the roster and ending up with crappy fights, then yeah, it's something you have to be concerned about. I mean,
it's just these aren't guys that are going to make the UFC any money. Nobody's going to buy a card or buy a ticket in order to see these guys. And if they're not selling tickets somewhere and they're not drawing eyes on pay-per-view or selling merchandise at least, then they're not going to be making any money for Zuffa.
Well, I mean, I think the mere fact that they're on TV is making money for Zuffa in the sense that they're taking up broadcasting time, and Zuffa is selling advertising for that time, and the television contract is paying Zuffa for that contract or for that time. I mean, so yeah. I mean, I don't think the UFC is losing money on those guys. I'm saying that, like, in terms of providing some sort of consistent quality to your product, there is an interest in not necessarily having any guarantee that you're going to keep those guys around. I mean, I think it was the Carwin Nelson season of Tough. Dos
Santos Lesnar.
No, I mean, I can't remember which one it was. It was the one that Colton Smith won. They kept like 2 guys from that season.
Oh yeah, I think that was 3. I want to say that was like 14 or 15. I think it's 15. I think 15 was like the bastard season.
Yeah,
the chicken shit into chicken salad.
I think the only Brock Lesnar's sole moment of personality from that entire season. Because I watched the whole goddamn thing.
Just to give people a point of reference, if the UFC's employing or has 465 guys under contract, that's 75 more than the total active NBA rosters combined. The NBA rosters allow 13 active guys, and 30 teams means 390 guys. So the UFC has surpassed the total roster of the National Basketball Association.
Yeah, it'd probably be pretty comparable if you consider the guys that rotate in and out of the D League.
Yeah, the D League 10-day contract guys. Yeah.
How many guys are boxing for a living in this country? 3,000. I mean, how many boxers are there in America?
I'm
just trying to compare the roster of combat sports versus professional athletes.
Well, if you're comparing MMA to boxing, you have to include Bellator, King of the Cage.
Well, but that's how deep do you go? Is it the WBC top 50, or is some guy that's 132? Is he a pro boxer that also works at Subway?
Well, half the guys in the UFC work at Subway on the side.
No, that guy, not Pat Cummins. You ask Pat Cummins how happy he is, and ask him to compare working for the UFC for being a fucking barista, and he'll tell you.
Well, I mean, those two things are not mutually exclusive.
And I would like to see their pay go up, but I don't think it's going to be at the beneficence of the UFC. Although I do wish I had my Bill O'Reilly picture that says "Pride dies, pay goes up." You can't explain that. You can't explain that. Can't explain that.
Derek, you should really embrace that Bill O'Reilly role.
Dude, you can't explain that. All right, I'm not splotchy enough. I'm about his height, but no, I could never be a dick to Al Franken, so I can't be Bill O'Reilly.
Well, that provides us the perfect transition into UFC 170 coming up this weekend. I think that with Rashad Evans out now, the biggest story to me, or the biggest thing that I'm interested in, is this is going to be a really good indicator of Ronda Rousey's drawing power, because there is basically nothing else supporting this card except for her.
Well, that was the case with her first fight against Liz Carmouche. That was also pretty much a dog shit card.
That's a dog shit card, but it had a historical significance, and
that it was into the year,
What? No, the Carmouche fight?
No, it was the first female fight in UFC history.
Yeah, it was the first female fight in UFC history. It had a lot of attention just for that. This is the first fight that Rousey has where she's main eventing a card with someone that basically has no name value outside the fight industry. And there's nothing out. There's no Anderson Silva. There's no historical significance to the event. This is the first time we're going to see her drawing power tested with nothing else on top of it.
I'll put my over under at 350. she blew me away with her first numbers, and between the casuals and the difference in the bar crowds that you see, and just the conversation leading up to the fight, I'm sure she'll get some mainstream press, ESPN, in the coming days. I think that she's a draw, and I think that she's probably like the number 4 or 5 draw in the company, just as a name basis for pay-per-view. So I think 350.
I'd set it at about 300, and I don't think that's a bad number at all, considering where the UFC is at right now, with having lost Anderson for the foreseeable future, having lost GSP for the foreseeable future. Like 300,000 buys is a pretty good number it would be a pretty good number for them right now. And McKinley pointed out in the chat. The first Rousey's first effort, in addition to the historical significance, had Henderson Machida, which if we're talking about
the world was on fire for Henderson Machida.
I mean, okay,
Jesus Christ.
That's a fair point. I mean, I don't think anybody thought that fight was going to play out any differently than it actually did, but still, some name value. It also had Josh Koscheck on it, for those of you who care about such things. I'm not among them, but there was name value on that card. Otherwise, this one has nothing. This one has absolutely nothing. So yeah, I mean, I'd say 300K is about right. If she does more than that, that's fantastic, and the UFC had better be praying that she doesn't run off to Hollywood right after this.
And 300K would put that in the neighborhood of Cain Velasquez, Dos Santos 3, Jones Gustafsson, the Henderson Pettis fight. Going back a little further, the Aldo Edgar pay-per-view. So yeah, that's certainly not a bad number in this environment at all.
Why? What are you sneering at? It's a woman. We were joined by a woman, and that's your reaction. I don't understand.
I thought for sure this was going to be some troll job.
Ew, cooties. No, let her fucking give her a chance. Don't be that way. Let's talk about this Israeli fighter that the UFC has signed. Who else is looking forward to Dana White weighing in? You think I give a fuck about Bantustans? Look, I like the 67 borders, but they don't fucking listen to me over there. They don't fucking care what I think.
I mean, I would legitimately pay money to hear Dana White talk about the Israel-Palestine situation.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I am so all in. I'm just like, everybody knew that Yasser Arafat was a cocksucker. Okay, everybody knew that. And just for him to talk for like 10 minutes in that vein after that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be putting Dana White's actual skill sets to good use. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. He could get that thing figured out in 45 minutes, no problem. Get him in a casino, have him play some blackjack. Would not be a problem.
I mean, that's the reality show he should have been selling to the Discovery Channel.
But on a more controversial note, here's his quote from Noad Lahat from Israel. And his parents were both IDF, Israeli Defense Force generals, one in Special Forces, the other one, I believe, in Intelligence Services. This is what he said to the Telegraph in the UK, quote, "I fought in Gaza and Lebanon, and I'll have no problem fighting people from there as long as they are not supporting the terrorist organizations. But not everyone from this area is an enemy for me. I like to see people as individuals, not as a color or a flag," end quote. So not as bad as I will not fight those dirty sand people. But what is the government of Lebanon a terrorist organization? How deep are we going here where this guy's going to start turning down fights based on political affiliations?
I mean, who's in the UFC that he would even have the opportunity to turn down?
The first guest that we had was CR, but I don't think the Israelis and the Afghans are really have that much animus towards each other.
I mean, luckily, it doesn't look like Lebanon or Palestine are budding MMA hotbeds at the moment. So hopefully it doesn't become an issue.
I think we could get it. We need to find a good Syrian or Jordanian, or maybe get Gokhan Saki to come over. I think an Egyptian would work in a pinch, and then we could really we can do something here. I feel like we can do something here.
Yeah, I had no idea who this guy was until someone, I don't know who it was. Was it you, Callum, who brought it up right before the show? So
Callum and I were talking about it last week because I really wanted to hear Dana White weigh in on this one. So I know he has to be asked. Somebody has to ask him. So what do you think about that whole thing over there? And I don't think he's just going to look at him and be like, "Are you fucking crazy?" I'm not going to say anything. I think he will, and I'm waiting for it.
I mean, it's kind of interesting that I think this is one of the unforeseen consequences of the UFC's international expansion is that they're doing business in parts of the world with people from parts of the world that frankly aren't all that familiar to the average American or to the average fan. I mean, this is kind of a touch unrelated, but so the strongman leader of Chechnya, a guy named Ramzan Kadyrov. Who has just the weirdest fucking Instagram you'll ever see in your life. It's like all this Stalinist, like cult of personality stuff mixed with a love of combat sports. Had a picture up there.
Sounds like Dana White.
Not all that dissimilar, but so Kadyrov's Instagram puts out a picture of Zubaira Tukhugov, who won his fight on the prelims of last Saturday's show. And I mean, Kadyrov has been accused of all sorts of human rights violations, of personally torturing people, like lots of murder. I mean, he's like a legit bad dude. But so, if the UFC is going to be signing more and more fighters from the North Caucasus, whether it's from Chechnya or Dagestan or what have you, I mean, stuff like that is going to come up regularly. It's going to come up with Noad Lahat and talking about Palestinians. I mean, this is kind of it's interesting territory for the UFC specifically and MMA more generally to be digging into.
Absolutely.
Is this something that's come up in boxing at all? Do we know?
Are there war criminals in boxing? Let's look into that.
Well, there is video on the Instagram of Ramzan Kadyrov fighting one of his ministers in a boxing ring because he hadn't taken care of the ministry building. So there's your connection.
That is all. That's a great way to fucking figure out who gets a promotion too. Those internal ministries over there, they have it right. And you make an excellent point too, because you look at kind of the Dagestani invasion that's happened recently, and most people before the Boston bombings last year, were coming up on the year anniversary of that in a couple of months. They didn't even know where Dagestan was, or that Russia was actually comprised of a bunch of pieces that are not in fact Russia. Like it's just completely like unbeknownst to people. And the more fighters that we can get from regions like that, the better, because there is going to be a certain amount of I think enthusiasm for moving beyond your shitty lot in life via combat sports than in those areas like that than we see in other places.
Well, there's also the selling power of kind of the exotic factor there. I mean, that's something that the UFC could be trying to sell. I don't know how that plays out. I don't know if that's like a meaningful data point or whether this is kind of an exception. But I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting development.
One last thing about combat sports and geopolitics. I read a New York Times article yesterday about the protests in Ukraine, and there's a line at the near the top of the article. This is the wrong article. There's a line at the top of the article where it talks about information at one of the opposition party leaders' websites, and that opposition party leader was Vitaly Klitschko, and they made no mention of the fact that he was a former heavyweight boxing champion or the fact that his brother is the current heavyweight boxing champion. And I thought that was quite interesting. It'd be like if
well, I'm sure there were articles written about Muhammad Ali that did not, in fact, fucking mention his boxing titles. In Ukraine, the Klitschko name is much, much bigger than boxing. We're talking about guys that could conceivably run for senator and president and be legitimate candidates.
Well, you have to consider that the Times is written for an American audience who largely might not know of Klitschko's boxing status. It would be like if a European paper wrote about some insane protest in America that Dwayne Wade was participating in and refused to mention the fact that he was a pretty famous NBA player.
Well, I mean, if Dwayne Wade had a long history and a PhD in issues, pertaining to this.
A PhD in issues?
Well, he's got. I don't know what his PhD is in, but it definitely lends a certain credence to his words. What is his PhD? And they both have PhDs. I don't think they're in the same thing.
I think it's something sports related. I think it's something sports related. I think
like sports psychology or some shit like that.
I have no idea. It's definitely sports related.
But the man has a resume well beyond his boxing career that one could, draw from in an article. I don't know if the Times just spaced it, or whoever was writing it was genuinely unaware. But why you got to bring up the situation in Ukraine, man? It's fucking brutal. They need to get president out of there. They want to have closer ties with the European Union, and Russia's just offering them tons and tons of money not to do it, and they don't want to get caught into that sphere of influence. So rooting for the Klitschko's, rooting for the people in Kiev.
I mean, it does point to kind of interesting connections between politics and physical culture and athletics in that part of the world. I mean, like Alexander Karelin, the great Russian Greco-Roman wrestler, is in the Russian parliament as a member of Putin's party. I mean, you have Putin constantly wanting to be seen with Fedor Emelianenko. You have Ramzan Kadyrov hitting pads in the gym on his Instagram, which is again, I cannot recommend highly enough that you go check this shit out because it's just ridiculous.
I'm happy to see some links. Maybe you can throw them up on Twitter as well, and we'll get them some attention. I think it's like a uniquely Russian thing. Former athletes there. I mean, back in the Soviet Union, they would have named you a hero of the people, and you would have gotten to ride the train for free. And now you get, your pictures taken with Putin, and if you're Fedor, you're not going to have to worry about money for the rest of your fucking life because you teach him Sambo. Like, it's just kind of an access to power that's led by this admiration and the want to be seen as manly as the people that you're hanging around with. It's not new what Putin's doing. It's just kind of a throwback to what the Russians have been doing for a long, long time.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Is Krokop still a member of parliament? Was that what his position was?
Well, no, he couldn't figure out the angles in Parliament. They changed it to an octagon. It used to be in a ring. He couldn't trap anybody anymore, so he bowed out. The best joke I'll make all year.
Yeah, that's gonna be tough to top, Derek.
There's too many corners now. There used to be just 4, and now there's like 8.
Wikipedia is failing me.
Short answer is no.
That's Filipovic, Filipovic.
Wasn't he involved in government?
He was in Parliament forever ago.
Okay, he was.
I thought he was a senator, actually. He was a senator in Parliament, and he was a member of LUCO, the anti-terrorism force.
Yeah,
that's quite the resume.
Shifting back to 170, obviously, well, I think one of the interesting things too about the main event, McMahon is the first opponent for Rousey, where Ronda is below minus 500 at the sports books, although the average line right now is minus 473, which for all intents and purposes is a minus 500 line.
Is this an example of the UFC putting the best women fighters in the world against each other? Like, is there a better opponent for Ronda Rousey at 135 than Sarah McMahon right now?
No,
Can we give credit where it's due?
No, there absolutely isn't a better fight there isn't a better fight to make. I mean, and this is
tell
it's
your boss that. No, I'm kidding.
Wait, what?
I said tell your boss that because he says they don't put the best against the best anymore. But I digress.
No, I mean that's a great fight. I mean, and McMahon is probably going to lose. I mean, there's a reason Rousey is a 5-1 favorite. She's younger. She's a more dynamic athlete. She's got better ancillary skill sets. But McMahon's never been taken down in an MMA fight. Rousey isn't going to ragdoll her around the way that she has her last few opponents. It's like, God bless Miesha Tate, but she is not on the same level as Rousey athletically, and she never will be. Even if she were to do nothing but work on her explosiveness for the next decade, pause time, and then come back and fight her again, she's still never going to be on that level.
Travel at the speed of light and train, let relativity take its course. No, you can't catch up.
Yeah, it's just never going to happen. And I mean, McMahon will be the first person that Rousey's fought who can actually come close to matching her in that category. So I mean, it's an intriguing fight. I mean, Rousey is still almost certainly going to win, armbar, 3rd round, 4th round maybe. But it is the best fight that they can make at 135. I'd say it's better than Cyborg.
I would too, but everybody seems to have this mythical idea that Cyborg at 135 is going to be this mythical killer when she's never even, to my knowledge, she's never even attempted to make the weight. So I don't see that. I know that Tito's not her manager anymore. Hell of a job with that one, Tito. Looking forward to the rest of your MMA career. And Bellator says that Bjorn Rebney's talking like, there's this danger that Tito might be paralyzed if he fights again, so we got to be 100% sure. What kind of signing bonus did they give him that they might have just flushed down the toilet so that he could appear on TNA a few times? Like that. What a horrible, horrible signing.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
It was not great. And I mean, why? And if you couldn't sign Tito, then what the hell did you sign Rampage for?
Well, I mean, it really helped them sell that pay-per-view they were planning.
Absolutely. No, the pre-orders looked great. The numbers were great. They sold a lot. They sold like 30 tickets in that arena. It was looking good. That's the killer thing about me. They sold like no tickets to that. I think they sold 6,000 out of like 20,000 or 13,000 seats, less than half. And it was in Huntington Beach. It's 2 miles away from where Tito Ortiz got his fucking nickname.
I mean, you're never gonna be able to convince consumers that Tito and even Rampage are not just wildly past their primes. I mean, nobody like even the most gullible fan of Tito Ortiz, assuming that's still a thing that exists, is going to be convinced into thinking that he's going to show up and look like Tito Ortiz looked 15 years ago, which as far as I can tell, nobody alive remembers.
Well, yeah, because you say it and they're just like, man, like I played the first UFC Undisputed game on my Xbox back in 2002, and Tito Ortiz was on it. Like, that's right. It's been a long time coming. Most guys that were kicking ass back in 97, 98 are not doing so today.
Yeah, Gary Goodridge says hello.
And Josh Barnett, when he wakes up, will tell you the same. Does he have another fight scheduled? I know he wants to come back, but they haven't announced what they're going to do with him yet, have they?
I don't think they've talked about it yet.
I
think the only, I don't think we really need to talk about Cormier Cummins. I mean, it's essentially now a tune-up fight for Cormier. But interestingly, the McDonald-Maia fight really has become quietly the most interesting, relevant fight on the card, at least to me.
I loved it when they made it because it's a great
fight. But I think now, now that Evans and Cormier is off, which was a really great fight,
yes.
This is now the most interesting fight in terms of relevance for these guys and where their careers are going. If McDonald loses this fight, it certainly doesn't put his career totally off the rails, but, as a guy who came in with a ton of hype,
it's
it really
bad
him.
for Rory if he loses. It's okay if Damian loses. It's bad if Rory loses.
Well, if Maia loses, then, any hope that he had of maybe fighting for the title is pretty much washed away. He's 36 now, I think, and it would be pretty hard for him to come back. Even if you thought he won the Shields fight, he didn't necessarily look great.
That's why I wrote when they made it that I think it's a perfect fight for McDonald. I think that after McDonald's lackluster performance against Lawler, where he wasn't really in trouble, it wasn't like he got knocked silly and then was just off kilter for the rest of the fight. It was just lackluster. So you put him against somebody in Maia who's getting older, who is desperate, who is incredibly dangerous with his submission game and likes to get in close. And that's a perfect opponent for McDonald. Somebody's going to make him work and put him in danger if he doesn't. So that's why I'm excited to see what kind of mindset McDonald comes in, given that he tried to do the same thing to Lawler that he did to Ellenberger, and when it didn't work, he couldn't adjust.
I mean, at this point, I still think Rory McDonald is a long-term top 5 welterweight, but at this point, his limitations as a fighter should be pretty clear to us. He doesn't have absolutely top-end athleticism. He's a very good athlete, but he's not an outstanding athlete relative to the top of the division. As far as I can tell, he has absolutely zero power in his hands. I mean, that's just not something that he has, and it's hard to compete with guys like Lawler or Hendricks or even Carlos Condit if you can't hurt somebody with your strikes. I mean, so the real heart of his game is always going to be his top game. I mean, I think he can beat Maia from top position if he takes him down. I mean, he's savvy enough. He's got a heavy enough base. It's going to be tough to move him. That's really his bread and butter. And when he either can't impose that, whether because he's fighting a guy with fantastic takedown defense like Jake Ellenberger, or he won't. I mean, maybe he's going to be afraid to take Maia down. I mean, he's not going to look like a killer. I mean, he can be in the right circumstances, but he has his limitations.
Right, that top echelon of the division, as you mentioned, if you can't take a punch and you can't deliver one back, I mean, I don't doubt McDonald's chin. Even after the first Condit fight, you could see him being able to recover. I still think the stoppage there was a little bit iffy, even if you thought Condit was going to win the decision. But I agree that it's going to be tough for him to kind of crack that top 4. and that there's the potential for a boring fight here because McDonald's main concern is going to be not losing no matter what Maia's motivation is and how voracious he's going to be trying to go for the finish.
One last thing about this card, and since we've got you, Patrick, this is sort of a perfect opportunity. Aljamain Sterling makes his debut on the preliminary card against Cody Gibson. I think he was number 2 on your list.
He was number 2 on my list. I absolutely love Aljamain Sterling. He's a really sharp, really professional young guy. I mean, when that fight was first scheduled, he was a late notice replacement for Lucas Martins, or to fight Lucas Martins. He was out there on Twitter looking for video of Martins, even though he only had 4 weeks to train for the fight. I mean, he was looking to be as prepared as humanly possible for it. I mean, that always bodes well for a guy's career. But his game is tricky. Watch out because Rogan and Goldberg are going to be talking about, oh, look at what an athlete he is, and he is a great athlete, but his game is really crafty and really polished, especially for a guy who only has about 3 years under his belt. Like, look at the way he's gonna throw some wild stuff. He's gonna throw some spinning stuff. He's gonna throw some jumping stuff, but he doesn't throw it for the sake of throwing it. He's looking to move you into those strikes. His bread and butter is his wrestling and submission game, but really the way that he integrates those two things. I mean, he gets the takedown and he is immediately looking to pass to mount. If he's in your guard, he's going to look to throw strikes, and then as you're defending strikes, pass. If you choose to defend the pass, he's going to punch you in the face. I mean, it's a really beautifully MMA adapted game. He was a Division III All-American wrestler. Trains under Matt Serra and Ray Longo. Does some work with John Danaher. I mean, he is a great prospect. I mean, Cody Gibson is not a bad prospect. He's just not as good at all of those things as Aljamain Sterling is.
The betting lines currently have Sterling right around, just a little above minus 250. Does that sound about right to you, Patrick, or would you recommend putting some money on that?
I would say that's just about a perfect line for that fight. I mean, Gibson was also, I think Gibson was a junior college All-American wrestler. I mean, he's long, he's rangy. I mean, he is a terrible. Gibson has some of the worst defensive striking you're going to see in the UFC this year. I mean, he gets hit way too much. But he's a capable offensive striker. He can take a punch. He can move forward. He's a good scrambler, and I think that's what's going to get Gibson in trouble in this fight. Is he's going to be way too willing to scramble with a guy who's a much more experienced grappler and a much better athlete. But I think that's just about right. Gibson has the power to hurt Sterling if Sterling gets too cocky on the feet. So minus 250, I don't think there's a real edge. I don't think there's a real edge on that line either way. I mean, I think if that drops to minus 200, you put money on Sterling. It gets above minus 250, maybe you take a flyer. Maybe it gets above plus 150, plus 175, you take a flyer on Gibson.
I wish you got that kind of analysis on the UFC broadcast, because I don't think you're going to get near as in depth as that with Rogan and Goldberg.
Well, I'll try sending the scouting report to Rogan. We'll see if he reads it.
What was that fight, Derek? It was from one of the scouting reports. There was a fight that I tweeted out where the commentator, it might have been a Sterling fight, where the commentator was really just straight about the situation, where one guy was the prospect that was coming up.
It was Bektik, Joe Pearson.
Oh yes, that's right.
That was it, and that announcer was tremendous, and I very much enjoyed it. It would be nice to get more of that. I'm getting pretty tired of Joe Rogan at this point. Like, he's not doing any of the annoying, cute things that I used to like, and he's doing more of the annoying shit things that I don't. So maybe we can get on that next week. We can recommend our replacements.
Well, it's not even replacements, because I don't, my breadth of MMA commentator knowledge is quite thin. But my thing's always been that the UFC's really shooting themselves in the foot by not being completely accurate with just where some of these guys are in their development. When you talk about how everyone's got great technique and is great at everything, or their
killer monsters.
Improving.
They're monster killers.
Elite.
Yeah, and it just doesn't. There's nothing that separates John Jones from Ernest Chavez fighting on the UFC, opening fight on the Fight Pass card.
I mean, this is what I meant when I was talking earlier about coming up with some sort of coherent strategy in terms of development. That you can't sell every fight as the killer elite versus the elite killer. I mean, and so there's nothing wrong with saying, look, this is the guy that we think is the one to watch out of these two. This is and here's this other guy. Maybe he'll surprise us. Maybe he won't. There's nothing wrong with that. And I don't understand why the UFC is so heavily invested in pretending that every fighter under its banner is equally good.
Well, and it also works on the other end of the career arc, too. If there's guys that are 35, 36 that are just sort of hanging around in the UFC, what's the harm in saying that this guy might not be here in a year or two. This is one of his last shots. He's going to have to need, he's going to need a win to keep his job for the next, year, 6 months. It just doesn't make sense to me because it just creates this really amorphous product where everything's the same and there's just no separation between tiers of guys.
Well, I mean, if what you're concerned about, as it seems like the UFC is at this point, if what you're concerned about is the brand above all, then you're maybe not even necessarily invested in creating stars. I mean, and so admitting that not everybody who has that shiny UFC sticker attached to them is as good as they're saying they are. I mean that creates some problems for that branding strategy. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or that that's the correct strategy to be following for them, but it makes a certain kind of perverse sense, I guess.
And on that optimistic note, that's the show, everybody.
Derek, you got anything you want to say on the way out here?
Yeah, rest in peace, North American MMA. It was a good run. It sucks that it's going to die, but I enjoyed it while it lasted.
All right, thanks very much for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for bringing the knowledge, man. Anytime.
You want to plug anything before you get out of here?
Oh yeah, Mookie and I have Mookie Alexander and I have the first in a series of collaborations coming out tomorrow. We're calling it the Hater's Guide to UFC 170. So check it out on Bloody Elbow tomorrow morning.
So did you guys just rip off Drew McGarry on purpose, or was that totally?
Oh yeah, it was absolutely intentional.
All right, well, thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Patrick, for coming on. Derek, I guess I'll see you next week.
Well, shit, I'm always here. We'll see about Roth, though.
Yeah, we'll see about Roth. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
All right.